Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow Star Wars fans. I said that we should boycott Solo, a Star Wars story, and every other Star Wars film until changes are made and Kathleen Kennedy is replaced as president of Lucasfilm. I fully intend to practice what I have preached. I am not going to the cinema to see Solo, because as fun as it would be to see it and make a review for you all, I would only be funding Kathleen Kennedy's campaign to mutilate, twist, and pervert the universe with which we fell in love. So the only way I will be able to gauge whether the film is good or not is by reading reviews from fans and critics. Thinking upon this gave me an idea. The critics seemingly loved The Last Jedi, while the fans dismissed it, so I have decided to conduct a little experiment. I've selected reviews of The Last Jedi from well-known publications which gave it a score above 3 stars, except in cases where the score was X number of stars out of 4, and made note of the similarities in their praise of the film. By doing this, I hope to discover why the critics liked The Last Jedi, and when Solo comes out, I will find these same publications and compare their reviews of The Last Jedi and Solo side by side and see if there are any similarities. By conducting this experiment, I might be able to discover that key thing which separates the critics from the fans, and why there is such a gulf of opinion between the two groups. At the end of this video, I will share my thoughts on the critics and their reasons for liking the film. Now I will quickly list the reviewers and the publications they have written their reviews for. First, Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter. Second, MANOHLA DARGIS of The New York Times. Third, Scott Mendelson of Forbes. Fourth, Ian Freer of Empire. Fifth, Matthew Norman of the London Evening Standard. Sixth, Sara Stewart of the New York Post. Seventh, Larushka Ivan-zadeh of the Metro. 8th, Allan Hunter of the Daily Express. 9th, Mark Kermode of The Guardian. 10th, Matthew Bond of the Daily Mail. 11th, Christopher Hooton of The Independent. So these are the reviewers and the publications, whose reviews I analysed to see if there were any similarities in their praises. After looking through the samples extensively, I managed to uncover some shared arenas of praise and accommodation and appreciation of the film, with which most of the critics seem to agree. So one of the things that the critics broadly praised were the technical and cinematic aspects of the film. The New York Times stated, "Mr. Johnson's use of deep red is characteristic of how he turns ideas into images, most vividly with a set that looks like something Vincent Minnelli might have dreamed up for a Flash Gordon musical with Gene Kelly. When that set becomes the backdrop to a viscerally exciting fight, all the red abruptly evokes the spilled blood that this otherwise squeaky clean series insistently elides." The Empire said, "Johnson finds a cinematic grammar that feels new to Star Wars. Big close-ups, brackets, tender touching hands, close brackets, top shots, elegant camera tracks, and pulling out in-world sound, leaving just music and image." The New Yorker said, "A battle in a desert layered with crimson-coloured salt is a visually arresting and PG-13 nod to the bloody reality of warfare." The Daily Mail stated, "The visual effects are stunning." The second category is humour. A lot of the reporters actually praised the humour of the film and the comedy. The Hollywood Reporter said, "This is the sort of mild, all-in-the-family irreverence that the fan culture eats up, and Johnson, who here becomes the first person to single-handedly write and direct a Star Wars feature since George Lucas did the honours on the original and 2 of the prequels, injects a good deal of this sort of elbow-jabbing humour into the proceedings. And the humour does at times strike notes unusual for the franchise, more often to the good than the bad." The New York Times said that the film has visual wit, which I assume to be praise for the comedic aspects of the film, but it is an ambiguous statement and I'm not sure precisely what they mean by it. Forbes is much clearer in its approval of the comedy. "This movie will blend its peril and desperation with cheerfully silly humour that never gets in the way of the drama or dilutes the stakes. The tone is firmly, laugh so as not to cry," and that Hamill successfully blends grave ponderousness with a comedic. Empire said the film was fun, funny, but with emotional heft. "This is a mouth-watering setup for Episode 9, and a fitting tribute to Carrie Fisher," and says that The Last Jedi is a multicoloured adventure that juggles different moods and tones. The London Evening Standard also came in to approve the humour. A scene in a casino in which rolling droid BB-8 is mistaken for a slot machine is one of several excellent gags, visual and verbal, that leaven the introspection. And the versatile Domhnall Gleeson finds nuggets of comedy in General Hux. The Metro also praised Gleeson. Domhnall Gleeson is once again as sneery as a Slytherin House prefect, only this time more winningly because he's allowed to be funny. All the while, a bouncy Avengers-style wit keeps things light on its feet, which is welcome given the bum-numbing 2.5-hour runtime. The Daily Mail stated that the film belongs to the new Star Wars generation, a fact that will heighten interest in some parts of the audience and diminish it in others, just as Johnson's clear decision to return humour to the sort of levels creator George Lucas would approve of will too. I keep this quote from the Daily Mail, not necessarily because it is a unequivocal endorsement of the humour, but there is a statement of fact that there's humour in the film, and it isn't necessarily a negative criticism of the humour per se, making me think that the Daily Mail is more or less ambivalent about the humour. The Independent, however, goes all out to endorse the humour. The Last Jedi is also very funny. The funniest Star Wars film to date, for sure, showing a self-aware, even self-deprecating humour for the first time in saga history, which is necessary when it's trying to do things like make you believe the First Order would ever work as a legitimate enterprise. Crucially, it doesn't come across as forced, a trap so many comic book adaptations have fallen into recently after seeing that, hey, humour worked for that one other film, so let's try and shoehorn it in. Another element of the film the reviewers seemed to like was the action. The Hollywood Reporter made a brief statement about the action, saying that the film was loaded with action and satisfying in the ways its loyal audience wants it to be. The New York Times stated that the only time it feels as if Mr. Johnson is checking Star Wars boxes is in some of the fights, especially during an impasse that turns into a slow-moving game of space chess. He may be checking off some of those boxes in an ode to George Lucas. Whatever the case, Mr. Johnson only infrequently comes across as beautiful or as overtly brand-expanding. So this isn't necessarily a great praise of the fights, but it is certainly not a criticism, and is certainly a statement which Mr. Johnson should be happy with. Forbes, however, was far more appreciative of the action, saying that the action was dazzling and in the service of complex characters and a complex narrative. Empire was also happy with the action, but happily, the reviewer states, Johnson gets Star Wars too. His action is thrilling but elegant. There is the most nonchalant lightsaber kill yet. The New York Post made sure to get it straight out the door by saying that The Last Jedi is a daring, high-octane masterpiece. The Daily Express, with the greatest clarity, expresses its complete and utter adoration of the action in the film. There are feats of daring do, spectacular aerial battles, brave souls willing to make the supreme sacrifice, fantastic beasts, betrayal, death, and a great deal more of Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker. And concludes its thoughts on the action with, filled with amazing action sequences and edge-of-the-seat encounters between warring enemies, The Last Jedi maintains the impossibly high standards of the series. The Guardian said, armed with all the samurai-style saber battles and eye-popping dogfights, both in dark space and on bright land, that a Star Wars fan could hope for. The Daily Mail stated, 2 attack sequences linger particularly impressively, the first involving the downing of a First Order dreadnought, and as for the second, well, just keep an eye on the aforementioned Vice Admiral Holdo. The Independent danced to the same tune. There's a brutal quality to the way the fight scenes are shot that reminds you this film was made by a guy who directed a few action-heavy episodes of Breaking Bad. The visuals are stunning, and so is the fight scene choreography, whether it's lightsaber to lightsaber combat, or a hive of X-Wings taking on a dreadnought cruiser, which is inventive and often breathtaking. Another similarity was how most of the publications seemed to think that the acting was quite good in the film. The New York Times said, the impetuous Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, is a charismatic villain who has closely fashioned himself after Vader. Forbes went on to praise Mark Hamill's performance, saying that Hamill successfully blends grave ponderousness with a comedic... The London Evening Standard employs more elegant sentences to praise the acting, saying that the major arcs in the film concern the trinity of the Tormented, beautifully played by Ridley, Hamill, and particularly Driver, who finds the light and dark within what might have been a dull caricature of wickedness. The New York Post basically goes out to praise almost everyone, saying, Hamill, often written off as a weak link in the old series, gives a wonderfully melancholy performance, weary, haunted, and unwilling to accept the mantle of legend that Rey wants to bestow on him. And Driver and Gleeson, as General Hux, his second-in-command, are a perfectly pitched terrible too, genuinely scary. Driver's glare does seem like it could move inanimate objects, and amusingly inept. The Independent, not wishing to be outdone by the New York Post, starts by praising the entire cast. The cast all handle themselves as cosmetically as you'd expect, given the eye-watering check that they're no doubt collecting. As a little note, Christopher Hooton, who is no doubt a very, very well-educated and respected English journalist, somehow managed to spell check wrong. He goes on to say, with Adam Driver throwing everything he has at the role, the man just soaked in rage and conflict-derived sweat the entire movie, and Mark Hamill providing, perhaps unexpectedly, its heart and soul. Supreme Leader Snoke, one of my least favourite of the Force Awakens editions, is less frustratingly nebulous this time around, feeling more like a proper Star Wars villain, and General Leia has a couple of scenes that are quite moving in light of Carrie Fisher's death. Reylo. Now this is the strangest one, but it does seem that these professional critics might actually be Reylo shippers. Forbes said, The Last Jedi is a long work of art that doesn't know when to quit, much like this review, but it successfully juggles between being the Rey and Kylo Jedi show. They are both superb and have interesting arcs. Empire said of Rey and Kylo's interactions, a more assured Ridley stands toe-to-toe with him, Mark Hamill, but is even better in her relationship with Ben Solo. Johnson's conception of their bond is potentially embarrassing. Ridley and Driver not only make it work, they make it gripping. The Daily Express goes even further by saying that the most compelling element of the story is the battle of wills between Rey and the dastardly Kylo Ren. Both of them believe they can influence the other towards a different path. Kylo may have killed his own father, but Rey believes there is goodness in him that can still be reached, whereas Kylo believes Rey could be tempted towards the dark side, especially if he offered to share the galaxy with her. Their struggles, both physical and mental, lie at the film's heart. Feminism/identity politics/politics. As most newspapers and publications have ideological standpoints and often partake in talking about politics and giving views on said politics, it is not overly surprising that some of the critics took their time to talk about the political aspects of the film they enjoyed and agreed with. I'll let the New York Times kick us off. They say, The Resistance, an intrepid multi-everything group whose leaders include a battle-tested woman warrior, and that an early heroic death sets the sober mood and stakes while gently re-establishing the franchise's new commitment to diversifying the overall picture. And goes on to say, Mr. Johnson has picked up the baton, notably the myth of a female Jedi, that was handed to Mr. Abrams when he signed on to revive the series with The Force Awakens. Forbes was also happy, especially with Rose's character, saying, Not only is Tran a wonderful breakout character, the film is filled with not a white guy characters all over the place. It's noticeable, most of the Resistance upper management is comprised of older women, and yet feels organic in a way that reaffirms this new Star Wars franchise legacy of what the cast of a mega-budget blockbuster can look like. Forbes also talks about the casino planet, saying, Boyega and Tran make a fun odd couple, as their subplot offers a look at those living high on the hog while tyranny reigns. The New York Post, it seems, can't actually avoid political language when talking about anything. In its most daring moments, it even tweaks a few series tropes, updating them with a decidedly populist kick. Make note of the word populist, which is often only used in reference to politics. And it continues. Pilot Poe Dameron, Oscar Isaac, aided by his droid pal BB-8, hatches one daring, harebrained scheme after another, only to be smacked down by an evolving rebel matriarchy. Alongside Fisher's General Leia, Laura Dern is resplendent in violet hair as the steel-nerved Vice Admiral Amilyn Holdo. Then, of course, it goes on to talk about the casino planet, which was just pure political messaging. Former Stormtrooper Finn, meanwhile, is on a code-breaking mission that teams him with rebel engineer Rose, Kelly Marie Tran, on a trip to a terrible place filled with the worst people in the galaxy. This is a long-running galactic dive bar joke, recall Mos Eisley of A New Hope. But the twist here is that it's a gilded casino, packed with high-rolling weapons dealers. Finn and Rose's wild chase for a glittering ballroom on the backs of liberated racing beasts points to Johnson's class-conscious take on the rebel cause. The Metro gets in on the action as well, but avoids class consciousness to talk about feminism. There's a refreshing gender balance among the key characters. Laura Dern's Vice Admiral Holdo may be dressed more for the opera, but don't be fooled, kids. The Guardian, or at least the woman writing this article for The Guardian, decided to prove that she was totally out of touch with everyone in Star Wars by saying, Johnson adheres to the max in that action as character, nowhere more so than in the introduction of Kelly Marie Tran's winning Rose Tico, already a firm fan favourite. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of out of touch. The Independent wanted to talk about masculinity, however, saying, between getting about as philosophical as it's possible to in a kids' film about the nature of the Force and examining the notion of the hero and the crises of masculinity tied into this, it wants to break the idea of Star Wars apart, inspect it, then put it back together in a different and more nuanced way. In this sense, it's easy to see why Disney has entrusted Johnson with developing an entire new trilogy. Postmodernism / destruction of the light versus dark archetype. I apologise for the long title for this category, but I wasn't really sure how to categorise these statements. The Hollywood Reporter will start us off. An ideological battle ensues involving both Rey and Kylo Ren that's philosophically engaging and narratively elemental. It's where the film has been headed all along and will assuredly serve as the springboard for what's to come in 2 years. Forbes makes a statement on this as well, but unlike The Hollywood Reporter, doesn't praise the decision outright, but doesn't criticise it either. It is a long, sprawling, and sometimes messy movie about messy conflict and moral ambiguity in a time of relative immorality. The Daily Mail also takes a more neutral approach. Elsewhere, however, this is very much a film that, despite the reappearance of one much-loved old character and the most famous hologram in film history, belongs to the new Star Wars generation, a fact that will heighten interest in some parts of the audience and diminish it in others. I will repeat this statement from The Independent because it is an approval of this new direction. Between getting about as philosophical as it's possible to in a kids' film about the nature of the Force and examining the notion of the hero and the crises of masculinity tied into this, it wants to break the idea of Star Wars apart, inspect it, then put it back together in a different and more nuanced way. In this sense, it's easy to see why Disney has entrusted Johnson with developing an entire new trilogy. Preliminary conclusion and hypothesis. After reading through the reviews and pointing out the similarities in praise, I have come to an overarching conclusion. These critics are most definitely ignorant of what Star Wars fans liked about the previous installments and what they want in the future ones. Yes, fans have always loved the cinematic spectacle of Star Wars, and good acting is always appreciated, but so many of the other elements that the critics praised in my sample are just not what the fans wanted. The humour of The Last Jedi cannot hold a candle up against the comedy in the original trilogy. The humour of the original trilogy was more sardonic, even witty, and definitely more mature in tone. The humour in The Last Jedi felt like it was ripped out of a Guardians of the Galaxy film, and just feels out of place, and in some sections, excessively juvenile. That type of humour may work for Guardians of the Galaxy, and for Avengers Infinity War, but it is just completely foreign and alien to Star Wars. Without retreading old ground, the action is just nonsensical. In the original trilogy, the villains were competent enough to win a fair number of engagements, so they could pose as a credible threat against the protagonists' lives and cause. The Empire obviously made enough mistakes so they would lose, but even after rewatching the original trilogy again and again, I am hesitant to call any of the commanders stupid or incompetent. The reason the action is bad in The Last Jedi is because it convinces the audience that both sides are commanded by idiots, and that the First Order is not a great threat. Just ask this question. If you were an admiral of a space fleet, and you had to fight a battle against either an Empire fleet or a First Order fleet, which one would you choose? Because I have no doubts about which I would choose to do battle with. The point is, the critics may like the villains to be a bunch of buffoons who are laughable, but Star Wars fans have always wanted villains who are competent enough to pose an actual threat to our heroes' lives. The beginning 10 words of Star Wars, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, do not seem to have registered in the minds of these critics, because they are happy to have political causes and doctrines from the Western world push themselves into the mystical world of Star Wars. Star Wars fans have long loved Star Wars because it was fun escapism, and the similarities to our world were small. Star Wars fans never wanted identity politics, social justice, or feminism in the universe of Star Wars. The previous time politics featured in Star Wars was in the prequels, and in the prequels, the politics served to tell us a story. The story of how Sheev Palpatine became Emperor, and turned the Galactic Republic into the Galactic Empire. The politics were an intrinsic part of the story. George Lucas did not write the story of the prequels to bash the white man over the head, and I say the white man because, let us be blunt, the people who made The Last Jedi and a number of its admirers seem to have something against white men. For some reason, however, the critics by and large seem to like this invasion of contemporary issues into what was once a grand, epic space opera. Related to this critical appreciation of politics in The Last Jedi is the postmodern deconstruction of the struggle between good and evil, light and dark. There is a strange cabal of critics in the upper echelons of our society who sniff at archetypical tales and representations of good versus evil. They think them childish and liken them to fairy tales, and consider themselves very mature for disliking said works of art and fiction. So it is not too surprising that some of the critics in my sample expressed appreciation for this exploration of the grey morality of The Last Jedi, and the deconstruction of archetypical trappings. The problem is Star Wars has always been an archetypical franchise and has always concerned itself with the battle between light and dark, and exploring themes such as redemption and temptation to do evil. Taking this away from The Last Jedi made it feel less like a Star Wars film. And finally, Reylo. What can I say about this? Rey Sue is still a Mary Sue, and thus boring and bland. Kylo Ren is still an adolescent whinger. The resulting chemistry between the two characters is dull and monotonous. No one cares about either of these characters. We cannot connect to Rey Sue because she doesn't have to struggle with anything, and Kylo Ren just isn't intimidating or awe-inspiring. I cannot fathom as to why the critics like their relationship. To reiterate my preliminary conclusion, the critics are ignorant of what Star Wars fans liked about the previous installments and what they want from these new films. I say preliminary conclusion because I still have yet to see what the reviews will be like for Solo, from both the critics and the audience, but my hypothesis is this. If Solo is similar to The Last Jedi, which it will likely be, then the critics are probably going to use the same language to praise the film and applaud the same elements I have listed previously in this video. Essentially, I expect the reviews will be the same in nature. And, conversely, the reviews from audience members will be low and will be criticising the same aspects which the critics appreciate. I could be well wrong, however, and we shall all see soon enough. If you have any thoughts on this subject yourself, please comment below. And thank you all for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day.